Renos, we're so pleased that through Janine you've ended up being in JUCONI here in Mexico to share with us some aspect of your work.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted that I've been able to come here. Thank you.
I wonder you've been talking about here at the conference. You've been talking about the adversity trauma grid.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could maybe give us a very short description of it, so people watching this can understand.
Yeah. Yes. Well, the principle actually is quite simple. The principle is to try to look at the wide range of responses that people have when they are exposed to adversity. In other words, any adversity, and here we're talking about any adversity. I particularly work with refugees, but I've also worked with people who have been exposed to adversity such as natural disasters, violence, trafficking, any of these adversities. And I don't want to go into great detail in terms of defining adversity, but mainly I'm talking about collective forms of adversity, not just personal or family ones, where more people are exposed to adversity. So what happens then? Usually, from a mental health perspective, inevitably and appropriately, we look at the negative effects. In other words, immediately what comes to mind and everybody's sort of mouth is trauma. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, trauma is definitely one part of the response. If we look at the wide range of all possible responses over the years, and I think it's common sense if one thinks about it in that way, but over the years I started realizing that focusing only on the negative responses is part of the picture, is not the whole picture. So what is the rest of the picture? So you're just going slowly like that. Well, the rest of the picture is that actually people succeed always succeed in retaining some strengths that they had before their exposure to adversity. Now, there are many definitions of resilience, and we may discuss that if you wish, but my preferred definition of resilience is precisely to do with those strengths that existed before the exposure to adversity, and people succeeded in retaining them. So we're not talking about new or new qualities or new. So we're talking about any strengths, any positive qualities, characteristics, relationships, anything positive about people. So always in all situations, people forget about those positive things. They themselves and the people that are working with, because they have to look at the negative ones, and that's fine. So my point is, if we were to look at the wider range and look at the totality of the responses, then we can still, of course, we're not there to praise them how wonderful they have done by retaining some positive qualities, but my point is, can we look at the negative responses, trauma, etc., in the context of the totality of the responses? And the third one, and that's why I sort of look at it, we need to look at people three-dimensionally in their totality, is the range of responses that are new, positive responses. This is what I call adversity activated development. In other words, development that has been that has emerged, that has been activated specifically by their exposure to adversity. You see, every language, in every culture, there are variations of the saying, whatever doesn't kill you strengthens you. And it's quite logical. Why don't we have space for that in our work? So this is the trauma grid. The trauma grid looks at the 3 columns, which is the negative responses, that includes trauma, and I can come to that. It looks at the positive strengths that existed before and they are retained despite the exposure to adversity, as well as the third one, the new positive responses that have been activated as a result of, because of the exposure to adversity, that they wouldn't have had otherwise had. Exactly. And once we look at that in the totality, then we help a person to feel more real, and for us our therapeutic relationship or any kind of intervention that we have is based on the totality of the situation and the complexity, because usually we sort of polarize things and we see people in terms of either resilient or traumatized. No, I'm interested in, if we're really proper scientists and we want to be scientists in this situation, we need to look at the phenomenon in its complexity, uniqueness and totality. And if we are like that, then we have to look at all these 3 dimensions and then try to develop a framework, and this is what the grid is. Basically it's a framework, it's not a tool, although people can use it as a tool in whatever way they would like, and it has been used all over the world in different contexts as a tool for all sorts of reasons, for purposes and tasks, monitoring even progress of therapy, or assessing a situation in a country, like the latest South Sudan assessment of the situation is using the grid, etc. So we try to look at what are the strengths, existing strengths, what are the new strengths, and what are the negative effects, and devise then strategies to be mindful of all of these, so that, of course, we are relating to people because they have some deficits, they have some pathology, they have some damage, some losses, etc. But if we don't look at them in the context of the totality, my argument is that our interventions are one-sided, they are polarized, and there are many other complicated implications as a result of that. In terms of fostering victim identity, in terms of etc., etc., etc. And they can be very successful patients or clients, but they are still patients and clients. Yes. And when we're talking about empowerment, this empowerment to help them realize their totality, and that yes, part of them has been damaged, no question about that. And you see, again, the field tends to be polarized. People who are just talking about trauma, and are talking resilience. And I'm saying the simple thing is that both are part of the picture. Let's put them and that is what the trauma grid is about. So it looks at these 3 columns, these 3 groups of effects, and also looks at the different levels: individual, family, community, culture. And if you look at it like that, even if you work with an individual, you have in mind the whole framework of the situation that you are intervening in, and then you can understand yourself and them, and it seems that it's quite helpful. It's logical.
It's such common sense.
Absolutely.
But as with all of these things, only after somebody's thought of it and brought it forward. And it sounds like such a respectful way of working with people, where you really you think of them as a real person rather than as a problem to solve or somebody to simply encourage. Yeah.
And also the good thing about it is that I keep emphasizing the word framework. It's not a technique. And therefore anybody who uses whatever technique can just use that as a background framework. And they can still focus on doing their EMDR or their body or their dream or their play, whatever kind of trauma work they do or anything that they do, it can still fit within that because the negative responses is real. It's part of the reality, and that needs to be attended to. but not exclusively. And there are epistemological problems if we look at it only exclusively in that way.
As you were talking about it, I was thinking it's really a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking
Precisely.
about people.
Thank you.
And a way of thinking about why you're working.
Precisely. Well, the fancy terminology, of course, is that it is an epistemological framework. It helps us understand clearer the way we conceptualize phenomena. Usually, we because of the emotional pressures of these overwhelming phenomena that we work with, immediately we want to do something and we want to go where it hurts. And our epistemology is skewed towards that spectrum of the whole range. And I keep repeating that has a lot of negative effects. And it is indeed a way of thinking. It is an epistemological framework. It helps us conceptualize more appropriately the situation. And what we should not forget is that all work that we do is based on certain epistemological assumptions that usually we take for granted and we don't question. And this framework is about questioning those very assumptions and proposes a way of tidying them up in some kind of coherent way, so that any intervention that we undertake is based on some sound conceptualization.
And what's so beautiful about it is it's applicable to such a wide variety of cultures. And I know that you've worked all over the world. You work with many different cultures, even when you're in Britain. And this sounds that it's
absolutely it's not, because it's not a technique. And it's an epistemological framework. It's an approach of understanding phenomena. It can be applied into any culture, in any context, because in every situation, regardless of the culture, and there are these three groups of responses. And actually that helps people to understand the unique way that people understand their negative responses. So it forces people, before imposing any technique or anything, for them to try to understand better in what way have these people actually understood their losses, their pain, their disorientation, whatever, or in what way can they grasp the strengths that they have been able to retain, etc. And that helps us actually to, it's almost, how shall I put it, culture friendly, because it forces us to concentrate on the way that each particular culture in their unique way express this understanding.
And for individuals, it sounds to me like a very helpful way to make some meaning around what their experience is, in a way that's more helpful to them.
Absolutely, because when we meet with people, because we're there to help them, and they're meeting us to receive some help, they will talk about their trauma story. And the trauma story is very engaging, is very painful. As human beings, we respond totally to that, and we get encapsulated there. And my
strategy for relating.
Exactly. And my sort of slogan there is that what else is? Who are you in addition to your trauma story? Now, I'm not saying that to them directly in this way, but that is my framework. So yes, I heard you have trauma story, but you are more than that. What are you? Who are you? And then we move on to sort of, and then that is, I mean, people feel real. I mean, they are not just simply victims of the earthquake or victims of the violence, etc., because we connect with their totality, which the situation itself, the adversity itself, crushes. That minimizes that totality, and they see themselves exclusively. They develop a kind of an identity, temporary or tragically sometimes long-lasting identity, as victims. And this helps them to realize that yes, that is part of their world, part of their experience, but actually there is more to them.
Renos, I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.